Newman. I'm a reporter at MLEX. I've been covering the Digital Services Act since even before its inception in December of 2020 and all the talks leading up to it. So the DSA, for most people who are on this call, this is supposed to be landmark legislation. It's replacing the e-commerce rules that were approved more than 20 years ago. It's really meant to be tackling some growing problems in our society, illegal content such as hate speech, child pornography, but also dealing with online ad transparency and even disinformation. So right before the festive holiday break, we had the IMCO committee, the European Parliament's Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, vote on its report on the DSA. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, in addition to the potential amendments that are going to be put forward next week in the plenary at the Parliament. The member states have already voted on their version of the text, and once the Parliament votes next week, then the trilogue talks can kick off. And as we're aware, that will lead to even more discussions in the trilogues under the French presidency. So main questions for us today will be tackled by Slavina Ivanova-Acheva. She is an assistant for an MEP, Eva Medel from Bulgaria. Eva Medel can't join us today, so Slavina is pitching in. We also have Benedict Blomeyer, who's Director of EU Policy for Allied for Startups, and Tim Geenan, Managing Director of LiveRamp, and Fernando Herrera. He is at Business Director at SECO. I'm missing Greg, and I'm unfortunately I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I'll mess it up. So he's from the IAB, and you can see his name listed. So why don't we kick off with Slavina? She's going to tell us a little bit about the what we can expect next week in terms of the debate. It's going to be lively, and she can give a few opening remarks about what we can expect.
Thank you very much, Matthew, and hello, everyone. I'm sure you are all very much looking forward to hearing from MEP Eva Medel, and she was also looking forward to being here with you. But unfortunately, due to a situation related to the ongoing pandemic, she couldn't be here today, and she sends her apologies. She hopes to see you very soon. My name is Slavina, as Matthew said. I've been part of Mrs. Meidel's team for 3 years now, and as the team member, having worked on the DSA and also coordinating our Brussels office, it's really good to be here with you today, and thank you to IAB for hosting this very important discussion. Today, I'd like to pass along some of the key messages that MEP Meidel would have addressed if she was here. In the notes that her and I had prepared together, she had planned to firstly wish you a Happy New Year. But yesterday, we all woke up to some very devastating news. Europe and Italy has really lost a convinced, dedicated, and genuine European. And the passing of David Sassoli is very tragic for us all. So we're sending our sympathy to his family and his loved ones in this very difficult time. Nevertheless, I hope I can provide some clarity ahead of the important plenary session in Strasbourg next week, where, as you all know, MEPs are scheduled to be voting on the Digital Services Act. So throughout MEP Meidel's time working on the DSA as the EPP rapporteur in the Econ committee, but not only, her philosophy on the file has been quite clear. The temptation to regulate and over-regulate is very high, but when it comes to new phenomena, the regulation should be smart and targeted. The Digital Services Act aims to take another step towards that target, not to kill the platforms, but to make them more responsible, more equipped to support democracy and freedom of speech, and to address concerns about illegal content. So in this regard, MEP Meidel is overall quite supportive of the compromise text that was reached in the IMCO committee. It's certainly not perfect and not everyone is happy, but that's how we know it's a good compromise. We welcome some of the new transparency measures added in IMCO in Articles 24 and Article 30, although we have to admit that we had really hoped they would distinguish between commercial and political advertising, as we had done in the Econ opinion. To us, it's pretty clear that you don't necessarily need to see the same level of information for a sneaker ad as you would for an election ad. But that being said, we're very glad that the ban on targeted advertising was kept out of the text. MEP Maidel has been very outspoken against such a ban, as it simply doesn't make sense given the wide scope of the DSA, which includes hundreds of thousands of companies. There has been talk of such an amendment making its way back to the plenary. We know that the EPP line is clear against such a ban, a full ban on targeted ads. Another point to keep in mind is that the Commission recently put forward the proposal on political advertising. So any provisions that are in the DSA should not overlap with such sectoral legislation. We really want to maintain the horizontal approach. And lastly, on behalf of MEP Maidel, if she was here, she would really encourage everyone to see the bigger picture of this debate around targeted advertising. It has certainly played out for a few years now. It's a bit like playing whack-a-mole. You settle it in one legislation and then it comes up in the next. So unfortunately, we don't think this is the last time we'll be having this conversation. And if it does come up again, we hope that policymakers will be less focused on trying to go for the headlines, so to say, and more focused on creating workable, effective, and enforceable measures. On our side, we've always been very open and willing to consult with stakeholders, like the many of you that are here today. And MEP Maidel and our whole team would be very happy to keep the conversation going with all of you on the DSA, on the AI Act, where she was just appointed E-Tray rapporteur, or on any other legislation. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
All right, that's a really good introduction. It's true that we've got a huge amount of ground to cover. Well, I'd like to just start off by talking about the impact on small businesses. As you might and listeners might be aware of, the European Commission did not include a ban on targeted advertising in its original proposal, and in the time since then, Commissioner Vice President Vestager has been asked many times what she thinks about such a ban. And she's often repeated a line about protecting small businesses, which is quite interesting because, you know, you look at the power of the big platforms, and one of the big goals of EU legislation, and in particular competition law, is to level the playing field. Just to kind of set the stage on this particular debate, just like to hear a little bit from Benedict about the issue, about small businesses, and what is it about targeted advertising that's so important for them.
Thanks, everyone, and it's good to see you all again after the break. Just very quickly, AFS, we represent 45 startup organizations ranging from Austrian startups to France Digital, for those of you who've not heard about us yet. Maybe to offer 3 very quick top-level points, how we approach this. For us, startups are the most consumer-focused businesses ever. So, you know, they're coming from an unmet need, and they support, you know, consumers and society with their innovation. And of course, we represent thousands of platforms which are in the scope of the DSA. And although COVID isn't over yet, we already have seen how folks have learned or worked at home with these platforms. So obviously, we think that the policies we are working on, the DSA, should support and make life easier for these platforms at the end of the day. Secondly, I think I'm not spilling any secrets here if I say that, you know, startups use ads to generate revenue. Many do, but almost all startups use targeted ads in one way or the other to launch or scale up. And to answer your question, Matthew, their targeted ads are not just there to give startups a chance to identify potential users for their goods and services. they also level the playing field. If we, I mean, we've talked about this before, but if we imagine going back to brick and mortar ways of running ads, this will be to the advantage of the big incumbents who can splash out on billboards and all that stuff. So I'm happy to share more about this, but I'm feeling a bit like a broken record. So I'll if there's more, I'll happily answer it. And just if I can just quickly kind of give my thoughts on the question of the panel. I mean, we are supportive of DSA and have thought it's also on a more or less good track. We were, we thought the Commission's proposal was perhaps a bit more balanced than the Parliament's proposal. But now that we're here facing the plenary, for us, the key message and the key ask is, there's a hard-fought IMCO compromise. And I wrote down the same thing Slavina wrote down. It's not perfect, but before we undercut the hard-fought compromise, it's important, I think, for us to stick to it. And if we do not, we also would wonder if, the Parliament ends up undermining its own negotiating position vis-a-vis Council and Commission, even if groups like APP or S&D that carried the text in committee would undercut it in the plenary, or even if it's not the group, then if there's big fractions of the groups doing so. And I've heard rumors that there's something in the cooker. I don't think it's a surprise. Folks are hearing that there's amendments floating around, and just to confirm, just to add on the point made before, we don't think it's perfect. A targeted ads ban for minors is something many of our members would agree with, but there's also questions about if this is the first step to a broader ban, and there are serious questions to ask about implementation of this. How to identify minors without disclosing more info or keeping it with GDPR. So. Slavina is the expert on what will happen next. I mean, there's anything from adoption to millions of amendments and maybe even referral back to committee. So I'll let her answer that question. But I'm happy to answer any further questions as well. I'll throw it back for now. Thank you very much again.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very good overview. I should have started out today's discussion just by having a word for David Sassoli. I think we were all shocked by the news this week, and I want to express my deep condolences to everyone at the Parliament about the loss, and it is a real loss, so not just for the Parliament, but for all of us in the EU community. So our heart goes out to the Parliament, and was really saddened to hear that news this week. Just wanted to push on to the other panelists. Fernando Pereira, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview from your point of view. I think it'd just be a good idea to kind of set the stage and talk a little bit about the interaction between media and advertising, and just how they're working together before we get into the specific topics. Thanks.
So first of all, I would like to thank IAB for the invitation. Just a quick word on my company. Sapo is the largest ad network in Portugal, and as so I will speak mostly based on my experience in the Portuguese market. What I can tell you is generically there is a strong partnership between the different stakeholders in the advertising industry. IAB, if we focus mostly on digital, is a very important of that relationship because it contributes to shape the best practice and the standards definition. However, there are other organizations, local associations, joint industry committees that also add value to those relationships. So what I can tell you for my experience is that globally we have a very healthy relationship, a very added value contributions between the media and the advertising industry. And I believe that we are in a good standing point to work together. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I just wanted to give a chance for our other speaker, Tim Greenan, to give an overview as well. If you can give a little bit of a chat on LiveRamp and what is targeted advertising bringing to your business.
Sure. Also very happy to be here. I think if you look at targeted advertising, I don't necessarily like how that's framed. So let's look at that as data-driven advertising. And we are in a data-driven economy, especially digitally. And I think the premise is very simple. So a brand wants to be as effective and relevant as possible. The publisher on the other side wants to increase the monetization of their advertising, and obviously they have other business models as too, but they want to maximize their revenues, their yields, so that they can produce content or deliver digital services or gaming or whatever. At LiveRamp, what we do is we're a data connectivity platform. So we take a lot of the streams of data that exist, and we make sure that they are interoperable and that they can be used between publishers and advertisers in a privacy safe way. And I think that is the point that mainly that I want to talk about today here, is that I've seen a massive increase post GDPR in innovation and about changing the way the infrastructure of the internet works. Because make no mistakes, like advertising isn't an integral part of the internet infrastructure. So I've seen so much new technologies, I've seen new companies arise, I've seen new ways and methods arise of how data is being used and processed. And I was actually very happy with that. Like I founded a privacy technology startup in 2017, just post GDPR. And like the way we were looking at things was already very different to what was normal in the industry at the time. And I think one of the biggest pain points will stay tracking. And we don't feel like tracking needs to be a part of what can be done with data-driven advertising.
All right. Thanks very much. I just wanted to take note that unfortunately Slavina has to leave a little bit early at 11:30, so I'm going to focus a few questions to her right away. So just to get into the heart of the matter, the IMCO report did not ban targeted advertising, but it added a ban on targeted advertising to minors. So while we don't have a broad prohibition, we have a ban against minors, and we also have the addition of prohibition of dark patterns. So just as a reminder to our audience, what are we talking about? So dark patterns would be when you're on a website and you get certain nudges, as they're referred to do things that you may not have intended to do. I mean, there's a whole range of things that this could be, everything from when you're going on a website to rent a car, and all of a sudden you find that you're renting a hotel at the same time, or it's basically the same kind of way of introducing, trying to get more sales, or some people would say tricking consumers into revealing more data than they ever intended to. And this has been pretty controversial over the last years, even mentioned by the former EDPS, Buttarelli, as a problem. So people have been aware of it. National Data Protection Authority has been aware of it. So just Slavina, if you can give us your view or your MEP's view on this. Is this the right approach to prohibit dark patterns? And is it opening up some, let's say, legal uncertainty for the ad tech industry? Namely because I gave a very broad overview of the definition, but dark patterns could be interpreted differently by different people. The commission is supposed to have a delegated act to better define them. But what's your view on a prohibition, and is this the right approach?
Thank you, Matthew, and to all the other panelists. It was very interesting to listen. Apologies for having to step out a bit early, but actually a lot of these issues are currently being discussed at the same time in an internal group meeting on the DSA. So with some outstanding issues, there's even our own position within the EPP, for example, that we're still defining. So everything I say today is in a bit of a preliminary stage. And when it comes to dark patterns, the issue actually did not come up in the Econ committee where MEP Majdal was EPP rapporteur for the DSA. But looking at the text that was adopted in the IMCO version of the DSA, of course, when it comes to such a text on dark patterns in the recitals, we would have preferred not to have the article included in the first place. But we find that, of course, it's a compromise. Other sides had majority. So there are some safeguards in there in the text of the recital stating that it should be without prejudice to the GDPR, for example, and it shouldn't affect the provisions when it comes to consent for use of personal data. Also, I personally think that the fact that the European Commission will be coming out with a delegated act defining what dark patterns are also gives some more room for maneuver there. And lastly, with this whole text, which again it's in a recital, we should see what comes out of the trialogues as well at the end of this. So I can understand that there is some concern about the vagueness around the text at the moment, and we're closely monitoring the issue. But we wouldn't say that it necessarily opens the door for a ban on targeted ads or anything of the like. We should wait to see what happens with the trialogues, wait to see what happens with the delegated acts as well.
Okay. Well, it is one of these things that it's certainly open for room for interpretation. So I wanted to, in a moment, I'll get the views of the other panelists. But while we still have you, Sabina, if we could just talk about another big question that's come up with the wording, particularly on the ban against for minors. Just quickly, if you can overview or give us your views on how this might be enacted in practice. If you're banning targeted advertising to minors, what does that actually mean? Would that mean that the platforms would have to go through some sort of age verification? Would that be allowed? If it's not allowed, how could targeted advertising even work? And I just note to our listeners that authorities have been struggling with age verification. In France, just recently, they're struggling to tackle how to prevent minors getting onto pornographic sites, and they've actually gone after 6 sites recently that aren't doing a good enough job to keep minors off these sites. So, Sabina, if you have a few words on that topic before you go, thanks.
Yes, of course. And again, another issue that wasn't necessarily addressed in the Econ opinion, just because we focused more on competences like competitiveness and so on. But looking at the text and the suggestion for the ad ban for minors, of course, it's very important for us that children are safe and protected and that they can give informed consent. So to my understanding, minors should be protected when it comes to using their personal data commercially, as they're not equipped to provide informed consent. And this would only apply in cases where the age of the recipient is known. And it would not necessarily lead to the banning of children-related products advertising, for example. But of course, there are some technical difficulties, as Matthew mentioned, and some questions around privacy or the mechanisms that would even be used to verify the ages. So even on our side, we think that maybe there is room for improvement there, or at least a discussion to be had. So we're very open to listening. Overall, as I said, MEP Majdal is supportive of the compromise and the EPP position on this. But if anyone would like to engage bilaterally on this issue in these coming days, we would be very much open to that. But as I said, there's an ongoing internal meeting also talking about this. So I would have to see the outcome there as well before speaking further on it.
Yeah, I'm aware that the situation's a bit fluid, and actually we don't even know if the plenary is going to vote next week. We'll find out more on Thursday when the Conference of Presidents meets. So hopefully we will get a vote next week and answer some of these questions. But yeah, just going on to the panel itself, in particular, the issue about dark patterns. For those really in the weeds looking at this, this is Article 13A, and in particular, the subgraph E. So Article 13A-E, talking about dark patterns. And what does it mean actually in this particular article? So an online provider can't ask for consent if users set a do not track feature on a browser. That's one interpretation of this. So I was wondering if the panel has that view. Is it actually going to lead to publishers, online providers not being able to ask for consent if for instance, a user clicks on a do not track feature on a browser? Benedict, if you can give us your view on that and what kind of impact that might have on targeted advertising.
Yeah, happy to share a few thoughts on this. I would assume that Tim also is able to chime in here, but looking at where we are coming at this from, I mean, obviously startups are very close to consumers and are always trying to learn what are consumers looking for, what are they after, and they want to, of course, have a shot at being able to make a value proposition to a consumer. And I think that's kind of the, and whether they are the first party or the third party, startups are operating in many ends of value chains in the economy. Of course, startups want consumers to make an informed choice, and I don't think there's much. We would also be in favor of transparency, and I think there's no argument really. I mean, not much of an argument from us to be had on that. That all being said, our members also tell us all the time about having clear and straightforward rules. Now, there was a great explanation already on how much has happened since GDPR from one of the co-panelists before. And we shouldn't forget that the Brussels insiders will know that e-privacy is still looming. It seems to our members that privacy legislation is kind of the most natural place to discuss privacy concerns. Startups will have a harder time, especially with their limited resources, to make sense of if targeted ads are thrown in every now and then in all kinds of legislation going forward, if I can say it this bluntly. That's just a few thoughts on my end.
All right.
A few more there. Oh, sorry, Fernando, go for it.
Either one. Fernando, do you want to start?
Oh, okay. Tim already muted himself. Yeah, one of the things that to make it perfectly clear, I really don't understand the added value for the consumers to make this kind of restrictions in a broad choice as it is a browser. When we are talking about a vertical option like a mobile app or a website, a specific website, okay, I understand, and I think GDPR already give the consumer mechanisms to control their options. But to make it in a broader sense, like a browser or a operating system, I really don't see the added value for the consumer, because in one day that option can be positive for me, in another day it can deprive me of something that can be positive for my options. So this is what I think of this.
Okay, excellent. Tim, sorry I cut you off.
Oh, that's fine. I think, like, in theory, this sounds really good because it's really easy. Like, consumers can manage their preferences in one central location. But in reality, it's just not true. So not all browsers are created equally. Browsers are different types of companies with different types of motivations and financial incentives. On the other side, like, who do I have a relationship? Do I have a relationship with my browser or to the websites and the publishers I visit? Because that's where the data interaction is going. And if we've learned one thing from GDPR, is like it's not simple. It's not supposed to be simple either. If you start breaking down all the purposes, if you start breaking down all vendors that are involved for any digital transaction, it becomes very complicated very quickly. If you then go over the geoscope, it becomes even more complicated. So I think the underlying problem here is that people shouldn't be confronted with too many choices they have to make. It shouldn't be opaque. It should be simpler. But I think that's something that the industry should start solving. There's no silver bullet to saying like, hey, manage an opt-out in a browser and that will solve for all issues. And I can keep going, by the way, but I also recognize this will be nice to drop off soon.
Just wanted to give Slavina just one more chance that she wanted to add something before she leaves.
Thank you, and thank you for the discussion. Really, I hope that we can keep the conversation going forward. We've always been a very open office when it comes to meeting with people, so please reach out. I did see something in the Q&A just about the targeted advertising and if we could expect for that to come back in the plenary session. Of course, nothing's finalized yet, but there is talk of that amendment coming back in terms of the complete ban. As I mentioned in the opening remarks, we're skeptical that a complete ban at this point would really garner that much support. But let's see how the week plays out. We have seen a lot of the groups more on the left, for example, the left side of the political spectrum calling for such a ban. But I think at this point, the discussion has kind of evolved past that. And instead, we're looking at other options. So the EPP line is firmly against a complete ban. And I think we would find common support in that thinking as well. So thank you again. I'll listen a bit more and then I'll step out, but it's really been great. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So just to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritties of the text. So there is, as you probably all know, some wording in the text that refers to GDPR. And what I was, was without precedence to GDPR. I was wondering if the panel thinks this actually means that which law is going to override? Is it when we talk about dark patterns? Is it really when we talk the consent rules in GDPR are going to be the rules, or is it more this wording about dark patterns? How does this all work? Particularly because we don't have any e-privacy regulation new rules. We have guidelines from various data protection authorities, but we don't have anything in concrete yet from legislators. So maybe we could start off with Benedict. What is your thinking about this reference to the GDPR?
Yeah, I mean, I generally understand and I would agree with the sentiment of the question. Ideally, you have one set of rules for one issue at hand, and it hasn't, helped make it clear that this is sought to be, the targeted ads have sought to be addressed in various legislations now. And ideally, in the best case, e-privacy gets unlocked in a way that is kind of, with a proper compromise for everyone, which allows us to have clarity there. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I would be, asking too much whether I know if GDPR overrides, anything coming from here on dark patterns or vice versa. All I would say is that we spent a lot of time with our communities understanding and implementing GDPR, and I think we've come a long way. And so I would try to build on kind of the progress that's been made there in the past years. Just to Slavina's point as well, I think that's really the most interesting question to ask right now for the long run is, will there be a political majority today or a few years from now, if that is in favor of targeted advertising, understanding the implications for SMEs and startups at the grassroots? I think that's really one that kind of has us scratching our heads a bit.
That's a great question. Go ahead. Any thoughts?
I'm glad to come back in as a final point. I think today we see that clearly there's I think a majority who recognizes the potential of targeted advertising for SMEs. I mean, as Matthew mentioned, even Executive Vice President Vestager has been very clear on this. As for the future, it's a bit more difficult to say. You know, are we headed down a slippery slope, or at what point do we kind of stop bringing this back in? Maybe if e-privacy gets concluded, who knows? But we hope that people will continue to recognize the potential benefits, and that's something that MEP Meidel has always been outspoken on, and I think a lot of the EPP as well.
Tim, do you have any thoughts about this? You know, is there a risk that the provision will undermine GDPR and interfere with the work of DPAs? You know, for instance, we know we have Italy's guidelines on cookies are just going into effect this week. France, in a spectacular way, went after both Google and Facebook last week about their cookie consent rules. So we have active DPAs. Is this provision somehow going to undermine those efforts?
I think so, yeah. I think that should be a concern. And I do really like Benedict's point. I think like we've come a long way with GDPR. I think we should build on that and we should expand on that. But something else that's happening is like GDPR is supposed to be one law for Europe. And what you're seeing is a lot of local interpretations. And if you're building software, if you're delivering a platform like that's actually very complicated, because it's very hard to build a product for when it's a moving target. Like you constantly operate in a gray zone where you really would benefit from clarity, and having two laws saying something different is not clear at all. And to the earlier point raised by Benedict as well, is like for the future, I think as an industry, like we've started cleaning up. And there are better ways, there are better methods. We should use them, we should invest in them until this no longer becomes an issue, because the basic premise will still be like advertisers want to be relevant and as efficient as possible, and publishers want to optimize their ad inventory. That will not change.
And one thought that comes up to in this debate is you know, what do consumers actually think? Has anyone on the panel done some research on what are consumers' views? Are they on balance? Do they want targeted ads? Do they want ads that are more relevant? Or is it just the cookie fatigue? Is it the fact that we, in Europe at least, have not gotten organized to really have a clear policy on cookie banners? You know, the EDPB, European Data Protection Board, is looking into cookie banners as well as all these national regulators. Is that the problem, cookie banners, rather than sort of a
Doesn't help. Like
problem with ad tech? Anyone?
I don't think. Just really quickly, I don't think anyone likes cookie banners, which is a problem because they are a direct translation of GDPR into a digital experience.
Yeah. So what's the answer then? Is it you know, do we need to have more pressure on legislators to have clearer rules? Like should we go down, for instance, the French method? You know, just to go back to those decisions by the CNIL last week, both Google and Facebook were fined quite substantial amounts of money, 210 million euros together, because they did not have a clear binary choice for consumers. So from the CNIL's point of view, it should be just as easy to accept cookies as to reject them. And on many websites, it's not. So, you know, it's no secret for anybody watching this or listening in. It can be quite complicated to reject cookies. And the default for many people is just to accept all because they're just so fed up with that. And what does that mean to accept all? Do you want every single bit of your web browsing to be tracked? What's the answer then? You want to start out, Benedict? Looks like you're.
I would say, I can't speak for all consumers, but for me, kind of the 2 points that stand out are, SMEs serve and startups serve consumers, and they are using targeted ads. We have good data to know, 68% of European small businesses use personal advertising and say it's effective to find consumers. The same amount roughly say that it's targeted ads are important for their business, and of course they are serving European consumers and other businesses. And so there's a direct value chain, a kind of argument that we can observe and quantify. And the second point is the consumers are also really diverse. There will be consumers who are really looking to have as targeted an ad experience as possible, and some who are more reluctant or don't really want anything to do with it. And I think the key has to be, or the goal has to be, making sure the law allows the flexibility, but it doesn't just impose a wholesale balance one way or the other. And then just to add one point, because it was mentioned before, we often talk about compliance with GDPR experience, or maybe the DSA experience soon. And I think we sometimes forget that startups are doing new things in new ways. There are no templates, for some of the things that are on the table here. You mentioned the travel platform example, and if you're booking a car and you get a hotel room, which is a kind of a standard practice many consumers might already be using and enjoying. And we are always hearing of new examples from our members of startups we haven't thought about yet. And it's really important to kind of have the mind for that this is a very new, still very new sector, and we don't want to preemptively block any innovation from happening.
I can see the concern there. Just to go on to Tim and Fernando on the issue about targeting minors, still talking about behavioral advertising. So that's one of the big changes at the last minute in the IMCO report. I just wanted to ask, from your point of view, people in with actual businesses, how would this provision actually be applied? How would you ban targeting minors?
Well, in my business view, I don't have the slightest idea. I hope regulators bring us a solution, because my first thought was, well, we will need to have a login platform in place in order to make a proofable ID of the user, but still there are global platforms with the same login systems in place, and they don't work 100% bulletproof. For instance, my 11-year-old kid usually consumes video in a specific platform and is a minor, but he usually uses an adult account. That's on me, because I'm the parent. I should control it. The platform doesn't, unless we enter some privacy issues, like the device having the camera on to check if it is a minor or not. The platform doesn't have a chance. So I think it's a very complex issue. I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, well, let's see if Tim has an answer. How
it's funny, because we're having that debate internally actually for a few months already, and it's a very tricky topic, because as a law firm, we do not want to process data of minors. but sometimes we work with publishers and like it's not exactly clear. Is this a website geared towards minors or not? So let's take casual gaming. Like this is both played by adults and by minors. Maybe there you would skew to a bit more towards minors, but maybe I'm offending people now that play casual games. When it comes to gaming review websites, it already gets more complicated. Like I'm 38, I'm a gamer, so I actually spend time on those websites. And I used to thought that I would be one of the only ones. Well, I'm not. When you play Fortnite, like, okay, they don't know how old I am. Am I one of many adults or one of few? So reviewing that as a company, and especially like in a co-controller context of data, it's really complicated. What do you do? Like, do you trust the self-classification of your partner who says we have minors on the site or not? So like, I think we need to go back to an ethical discussion here, as long as there's opaqueness in the proposals. As with GDPR, it is the actual solution isn't people self-identifying before they access the internet. And I really don't think that is the intention of any of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just to note that an MEP from Germany, Patrick Breyer, has put forward an amendment to make sure that the anonymity of the internet is assured. So that's an important issue as well. So I think you're both right that there's a lot of unanswered questions, and you know, as I mentioned at the top of the call, you know, we're about to enter trilogues. So this is you know, more of a bigger question for the negotiators. I just wanted to talk very quickly, Benedict, about another issue that might concern you, and that's the overlap with the Unfair Business to Consumer Practices Directive. And this is going back to the whole issue about dark patterns. And is this, you know, are we at a point where, you know, there's just too many EU regulations trying to do the same thing, but not in a very efficient way? Is there a risk then that things could get quite messy, in particular with this unfair business to consumer practices? And maybe you could just, for the benefit of our listeners, describe a little bit about what that means for platforms.
I also just wanted to, as an FYI, there's a few questions in the chat, which we, I guess, can get to after this. But I think, you know, I mean, there's, yeah, you're right. There's plenty of rules which are seeking to address similar or related questions. And I don't want in any way sound like we are trying to, the days are over when, you know, the internet was a Wild West, was unregulated, and startups were, you know, trying out anything and everything. It's very clear to our members that there are rules of the game, and they want to ideally be compliant from day one with them. And so how do we get to the place where we can allow, you know, enable them to be compliant from day one, and also have a trajectory to scale up in Europe? So, you know, having tons of rules with exemptions, which startups have to, you know, treat like hurdles on the way, have also not been perfect here. I don't know. We don't have a kind of a real position on the interplay of these two files. So I would have to defer further detail on the question there, or get back to you if there's more questions on that.
Okay, excellent. So there's one question here from the audience. It's the deadline for tabling amendments in plenary. Mistaken, that would be Monday night. Things need to be actually locked down. So I think that well, it's not clear what's going to happen this week. We'll find out more on Thursday from the Conference of Presidents. So I think that's right. And I mean, unless there's someone else on the call who has more about that. So just going to the Q&A here, and this is for Benedict or Tim. It says, startups and SMEs are making use of advertising. Is it not true that most of those budgets are being directed to the GAFAs, the big platforms? Would a change not also mean that more advertising budgets are directed to European media companies and publishers, maybe even European media startups? So, Tim, if you have some thoughts about that, or Bennett.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I just unmuted. I think not necessarily more. I think the playing field should be leveled. But whenever I see questions like this, and I see and hear them very often, I cannot help but saying, like, it is very easy to advertise on a large platform, on Google or Facebook or whatever. The tools work really well. Pricing is really okay. Like, you get good visibility. Like, there is something else other than privacy for the market to catch up on, to bring back more balance in spend. And I think there's some research also that says, if you look at advertising spend versus time spent, there's a disbalance there between large social platforms and the rest of the internet. So I still believe that with innovation, with investments in tools, and a lot of publishers in Europe are actually doing that, you can get back more of that spend, but you're going to have to offer different things, like easier access to media, better data, and deliver that at scale. So I think that is a better conversation to have.
Can I very quickly just add on to that? I mean, I think Olaf is asking a great macro question, and then we talk to the startups and think about it on a kind of on an individual startup basis. And I think for any individual entrepreneur, looking to start and scale up in Europe, the priority question is not if a company they use for ads is big or small or foreign or not. I think the question is, where do they get the best bang for the buck? And in most cases, startups, are competing against very big incumbents. If you think about fintechs, having a go at at very big banks, and you can do the same in any other sector. The question really is, with the very limited budget they have and the very limited resources they have in comparison, how can they address a key audience and make a value proposition to them? And the kind of, it's a very symbolic thing, but the analog billboard is not the most effective way of doing this right now. The targeted ads online is the best way for the vast majority of startups at this moment. And secondary, it's not really a question for them, how big a company is or where it's from that is providing that service for them at this moment.
We're getting close to the end, so I'm going to try to wrap things up a little bit. If there's one thing from today's discussion that's really hit home to me, and it's the fact that these amendments in the DSA are really raising big questions about what's the future for digital advertising. And last year we had moves by both Google and Apple to have technical changes for targeted advertising. Google started this FLoC, privacy sandbox initiative, in which I'm not going to go into the details of how it may or may not work, but basically it's not targeting individuals based on their personal data, but it's more about cohorts and sort of larger interests that people might have. Apple introduced a new operating system in which they had do not track, and many people actually opted for that, which led to big conflicts with in the ad tech industry, which are still with us today. So the big advertisers, Apple, Google, well, Facebook as well, they're looking at the future of targeted advertising. So with or without this amendment, we're headed for changes for the industry. Just wanted to get, from all three of you, your vision of how things may change in the next couple of years, either from a regulatory point of view or from a technical point of view, from changes from the big tech. So let's start off with Fernando.
So I have that's a very interesting and important question. I usually have several discussions with several industry heads regarding the future, and I believe that what these changes is bringing to us is the need for brands, for local publishers to have a more ambitious data strategy. And as Tim was mentioning, also developing the ad tech part in order to supply more effective tools regarding the setup of advertising campaigns. Regarding the regulatory part, I believe that the amendment for banning targeting advertising will come back, will be in discussion, and I hope not to go through in the following years. But regarding the tech part of the selling side, I believe there's an opportunity here, and I'm not naive saying that Google is doing this. If I believe that they are one of the companies that most benefit from the target advertising, and I believe that they will keep being that, besides the fact that they are banning the third-party cookies. But I believe that they are also contributing to show us the way that first-party data will be more and more important, and the ad tech part for the selling side will also be decisive.
Excellent. We still have a couple more minutes left, but Tim and Bennett, can you quickly go through your reply? Tim, we'll start with you.
Okay, cool. And first of all, the future is bright, obviously, so I'm an optimist. But like, there's so many more things that are going to happen. The infrastructure of the internet will change. Like, we can self-manage our identity, whether we want to do that or not is a second. Like, we're going into this metaverse. Like, we're gonna ultimately perhaps care more about our digital selves than our real selves. Like, I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, but like, it seems to be a direction that we're heading in. More and more so, privacy here is more about strategy and less about compliance. So you're gonna get customers and consumers that really care about a privacy guarded experience, and they're going to pay for access to that. And there's going to be a part that's fully data driven, like you're knowingly participate in a value exchange, knowing full well that your data is the asset being monetized, and you participate in that. And there's going to be a part of the internet like that's basically going back to the old days, like where there is no tracking, but there's also not a lot of revenue. So I don't see either one of them becoming the most dominant silo, but I think all three of these things will happen in tandem.
Good to have a positive outlook on things. And Benedict, can you end with a positive note, hopefully?
First of all, by aligning with, I think, the very, very intelligent remarks that were made just now. I mean, for your viewers, just as an FYI, when we're talking about, you know, what big tech will have to do, I think it's important to note there's a Digital Markets Act, where the big tech really are the only ones in the scope. So if that's something you're interested in, you know, Google the Digital Markets Act and you'll see more on that. I think Fernando's on the money when he says that big players will be successful in the field. You know, that's a truth that we are faced with. And I think our job has been how to refocus the discussion so that the rules are also allowing the 10,000 platforms that exist in Europe to challenge the big players, either the analog banks I mentioned before or the GAFAs. And our opinion is that, you know, ban on targeted ads is not the way to get there. And the last kind of hopeful note I will leave with is that we see great initiatives for startups from the French presidency, for instance, Scale Up Europe, or from the Commission like Startup Nations. And, you know, we are all about helping startups in the EU deliver growth and the green transition we're all looking for. I think it's this bigger picture that we should keep in mind. So, and to make sure we are connecting the dots with the DSA. because getting something like targeted ads wrong could really undercut startups' chances of delivering all these things we all agree are important. To encourage continuing the good work in the other fields, and then making sure it's not undercut with unintended consequences from the DSA. Thank you, everyone.
Well, that just leaves me to thank the panelists, and a special thanks to Slavina for coming in and filling in for Eva Madel. It looks like she's open to more discussions with anyone. So that's a positive thing, that the Parliament's door is open. So thank you, Benedict. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Fernando. It's been really great exchanging today. I hope everyone stays in touch. And as I indicated during the chat, we're very far from being over in this whole debate. So great that we can stay on top of it. And thanks again to IAB for sponsoring this event. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye, everyone.